Ever had a feeling you're not alone in your own house? That's how my story begins. My name's not important. What is important is the tale I have to share. I moved into a new house, a charming little place on the outskirts of town. It was quaint, quiet, and for the first time in my life, it was mine. There was something about this place, though, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Every night as I lay in bed, I'd hear it, a soft creaking sound, like an old wooden door slowly opening. I'd jump out of my bed, heart pounding, only to find all the doors firmly shut. I'd check every room, every closet, every nook and cranny, but nothing seemed out of place. I told myself it was just the house settling, but I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling. Then the lights started flickering. It was as if the house was trying to communicate, speaking in a language of shadows and light. It was random, but it was persistent. The electrician found no fault, and I was left with no explanations. I'd sit in the dim glow of my living room, watching the lights dance as if choreographed by unseen hands. And the feeling of being watched? That was the worst part. It was a constant presence. A sensation that crawled under my skin, making me jumpy and paranoid. I'd feel a prickle on my neck, a cold draft brushing past me, even in the warmest corners of my house. I'd turn around, expecting to see someone standing there, but I was always met with empty space. I tried to dismiss it all, chalk it up to an overactive imagination. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of my own home, of the unseen entity that seemed to have claimed it. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me, but little did I know the horror was just beginning. Nighttime brought a whole new level of terror. I used to love the night, the calm it brought, the tranquility. That was before it happened, before the whispers began. One night I woke up drenched in sweat. The room was pitch black and all was silent, except for a faint, hushed voice. It was so low, like a secret being shared in the wind's breath. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it. It was a whisper in the dark. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the house settling or the wind rustling through the trees outside, but then I heard it again. The whisper. It was calling my name. It was a voice I didn't recognize, a voice that shouldn't be there. The whisper seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, filling the room, filling my mind. The voice was soft, almost soothing, but the way it said my name, it sent shivers down my spine. It was as if the whisper knew me, knew my deepest fears. It was a terrifyingly intimate intrusion, a violation of my sanctuary of sleep. It was like an unseen presence had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. Every night after that, the whisper returned. It was always the same. My name, softly spoken in the dark. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was all in my head, but the whisper was persistent. It was real. It was there in the darkness, whispering my name, making the night a living nightmare. I tried to find its source, to confront it, but the whisper seemed to dance around the room, never in one place long enough for me to catch it. It was like chasing shadows, a futile endeavor that only served to heighten my fear. The nights became a time of dread, a time where sleep was elusive and peace was a distant memory. The whisper in the dark had become my unwanted companion, a spectral voice that turned my dreams into nightmares. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone. The whisper was not just a sound, it was a presence, a being, and it was with me, in the dark. I thought I could ignore it, but then I saw it. It was late one night, and I was in the living room, huddled on the sofa, trying to enjoy a late-night movie. The room was dimly lit, with the flickering television the only source of light. It was then that I saw it out of the corner of my eye. A tall, dark figure standing just at the edge of the room, obscured by the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at it, squinting my eyes, trying to make out its details. But it was just too dark. The figure was tall, easily reaching the ceiling, and it was thin, almost skeletal. It was just standing there, unmoving, watching me. As quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I blinked, and it was as if it had never been there. But the chill in the room and the goosebumps on my skin told a different story. I was scared like I had never been before. It felt like something had invaded my home, my sanctuary. I wanted to run, to get away, but I was frozen in place. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself, or maybe I was just tired and seeing things. But deep down I knew it was something else, something more sinister. I tried to go back to watching the movie, to ignore what I had just witnessed, but it was impossible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I was on edge, waiting for the figure to reappear. I thought things couldn't get worse, but then I found the message. My heart pounded in my chest as I unfolded the crumpled piece of paper that had been slipped under my front door. It was a scrap, really, torn from some old notebook, the edges frayed and yellowing. The handwriting was shaky, like it was written by an elderly person or someone in a hurry, or maybe someone in fear. It was uneven and jagged, the letters scrawled across the page in a frantic rush. It read, "Leave before it's too late." Just those 5 words. No explanation, no signature, just a warning. My mind began to race. Who could have written this? Why? What did they know that I didn't? I had so many questions, but the piece of paper offered no answers. Only a cold, chilling warning that sent shivers down my spine. I looked around my new home, the home I'd only recently moved into. It was an old house with a history I didn't fully understand, but it was mine, a place I was beginning to make my own. Could this be some kind of joke, or was there something more sinister at play? The message was clear, yet so ambiguous. Leave before what? Before something happens? Before someone or something comes? The vagueness of it all was what made it so terrifying. It was a threat, but of what? I couldn't tell. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I stood there, holding the note in my trembling hands. The silence of the house seemed to grow louder, every creak and groan echoing through the empty rooms. The shadows seemed to grow darker, the corners of the rooms more menacing. But I was stubborn. This was my home, my sanctuary. I wasn't going to let a mysterious note scare me away. I had a right to be here, to live here. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my life. So I made a decision. I decided to stay, to face whatever it was that was trying to scare me away. I was scared, but I was too stubborn to leave my new home. I wish I'd listened to that warning, I really do. A heavy sigh escapes my lips as I reflect upon the strange occurrences that have become my daily reality. The inexplicable movement of objects, the disconcerting noises that echo from nowhere, and that elusive, shadowy figure. They're all part of this unseen terror that has invaded my life. From the moment I wake up, the terror lingers like a bad dream that doesn't end. The morning sunshine, once a source of comfort and warmth, now feels deceptive, as if hiding the unseen terror lurking in its brightness. My cup of coffee, once a source of solace, now sits untouched, its warmth doing nothing to thaw the icy dread that's taken residence in my heart. The day progresses, and so does the fear. It's an undercurrent in every action, a constant hum in the background. Objects seem to move on their own, shifting from their places when I'm not looking. It's the small things at first. A book that wasn't on that shelf, a cup moved from its coaster. But then it escalates. Furniture creaks and groans as if moved by an unseen force. Doors slam shut, and the lights flicker, casting ominous shadows that dance on the walls. And then, there are the noises. Strange disembodied noises that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Whispers that float on the wind, an eerie melody that drifts from the shadows. It's as if the walls themselves are speaking, sharing tales of a terror that refuses to show itself. The shadowy figure is the worst of all, appearing more frequently now, always lurking in the periphery of my vision. It's a presence, an entity that is always there, watching, waiting. It's the embodiment of the unseen terror that has made my home its playground. I'm still here, still living in this nightmare. But the worst part, I don't know what happens next. I remember it like it was yesterday, a chilling memory that still haunts me. My name, well, that isn't important. What is important, however, is the story I'm about to share with you. A story that happened when I was just a kid, alone in our old creaky house. It was a regular evening, or so it seemed. My folks had gone out, leaving me to my own devices. The TV was my only companion, its droning sound echoing through the silent house. Then it happened, the unsettling noise. It was faint at first, like a whisper, a rustling sound that seemed to be coming from the basement. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the house just being old and full of unexplained sounds. But then, it grew louder, harder to ignore. I was scared, don't get me wrong, but I was also curious, or maybe just stupid. I decided to investigate. The staircase leading to the basement was old and wooden, creaking under my weight. As I reached the bottom, I noticed that the cellar door was slightly ajar. Now this was strange because my folks were always adamant about keeping that door locked. As I pushed the door open, a cold chill ran down my spine. It was darker than usual, and there, in the dim light, I saw it. A figure, shadowy and indistinct, stood in the corner of the room. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the fear making it hard to breathe. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen in place, my eyes locked onto the figure. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I was alone again, the only sound being my own ragged breathing. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, or many nights after. That was the first time I encountered it, but it was far from the last. Years passed, but the memory of that night never faded. It clung to me like a stubborn shadow refusing to let go. I was a child no more, but the ghostly figure from my past was far from forgotten. In fact, its presence became more pronounced, more real. It was as if the passing of time strengthened its grip on me rather than loosening it. It wasn't just the memory that remained, the figure, that ghastly silhouette, began to appear more frequently. It was always there, lurking at the periphery of my vision. I would catch glimpses of it in the corner of my eye, only to turn around and find nothing. It was always just out of sight, but I could feel it, always watching, always waiting. I tried to tell the people around me, tried to make them understand. I told my parents, my friends, anyone who would listen, but they all dismissed it, attributing it to an overactive imagination. They said it was just the remnants of a childhood nightmare. The more I insisted, the more they laughed it off. "You've been watching too many horror movies," they'd say, shaking their heads in disbelief. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't some made-up monster from a movie. This was my reality. Every day was a struggle, a battle against unseen forces. I was constantly on edge, never knowing when the figure would appear next. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, for fear of what I might see in my dreams. The laughter, the disbelief, it all took a toll on me. I started feeling isolated, like I was living in my own horror movie and no one was there to hear my screams. It was a lonely existence, one filled with fear and uncertainty. I was trapped in my own world, a world where the line between reality and nightmare was blurred. And the worst part? No one believed me. No one understood what I was going through. I was alone in this. No one believed what I was going through. It was during my college years I realized I wasn't imagining things. I remember a day just like any other. I was at the library trying to focus on an upcoming history exam, but as the minutes passed, my attention began to drift. I found myself wandering into the dusty old archives section. It was there I stumbled upon a box of old newspaper clippings. I'm not sure why, but something about that box drew me in. It was as if an invisible force was guiding my hand to open it. The first clipping I pulled out was from a local paper, dating back more than a century. It detailed a chilling account of a family tormented by a shadowy figure. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read on. The story was eerily similar to my own experiences. The figure, it seemed, would show up at odd hours, casting an ominous shadow and creating an inexplicable sense of dread. It would disappear as abruptly as it appeared, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. The family described it as a malevolent presence, a dark entity that had haunted them for generations. The more I read, the more I realized the uncanny resemblance with my own experiences. The same feeling of being watched, the same fleeting shadows, the same chilling presence. I dug deeper, poring over more and more clippings. Each one told a similar tale, each one a testament to the shadowy figure's relentless haunting. The stories spanned generations, each one echoing the same fear and helplessness that I had been feeling. The discovery sent a chill down my spine. It was a confirmation of my worst fears. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. I wasn't just dreaming or hallucinating. The thing that had been haunting me, the shadow that lurked in the corners of my eye, it was real. And the worst part? It wasn't new. It had been around, haunting and tormenting for generations. This wasn't just my nightmare anymore, it was a legacy of fear, passed down through the ages. I wasn't alone. The thing in the shadows was real. I decided it was time to face my fears. I had to confront this, whatever this was. For too long it had been lurking in the shadows of my past, haunting my dreams, and now it was time to meet it head-on. I went back to the place where it all started, my childhood home, a place filled with memories, both sweet and bitter. A place that, despite the passage of time, had remained unchanged, untouched. The old wooden door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the silent house like a ghostly whisper. Night had fallen, and the house was plunged into darkness. The only light came from the moon, its pale glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come, and slowly made my way towards the basement door. The basement, the place that held my deepest fears, the place where I had first seen the figure. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I descended the old creaky stairs. Each step echoed loudly in the quiet, adding to the tension that was already building up inside me. The cold hit me first. It was a bone-chilling cold, the kind that seeps into your skin and makes you shiver uncontrollably. It was a cold that reminded me of that dreadful night when I first saw the figure. The memory of it sent a shiver down my spine. Then, there was the sense of dread. It was heavy, almost tangible, pressing down on me and making me feel as if I was drowning. It was a dread that whispered of unseen horrors, of dark secrets hidden in the shadows. It was a dread that was all too familiar. I stood there in the middle of the basement, waiting for it to show itself, waiting for the figure that had haunted my dreams for so long to finally reveal itself. The fear was overwhelming, but I refused to back down. I was determined to face this once and for all. And then, there it was, standing right in front of me. The figure from my nightmares, the ghost of my past, the unavoidable confrontation had finally come. I was frozen in fear, staring at the figure in the darkness. My heart was pounding like a drum against my chest, its rhythm echoing the terror coursing through my veins. The figure was shrouded in the pitch-black night, yet its presence was undeniable, a chilling reminder of the horror that had unfolded within these walls. It stood there, silent and unmoving, as though waiting for me to acknowledge it. But I couldn't. The words were trapped in my throat, choking me. I was a prisoner to my own fear, a marionette under the control of this sinister apparition. It was in that moment I understood the true nature of fear. It wasn't the figure itself that terrified me, but the unknown, the unanswered questions. What was this entity? What did it want from me? Why was I chosen? I wished I had the courage to confront it, to demand answers. But I was a mere mortal, facing an entity that was anything but. My legs wobbled beneath me, threatening to give way at any moment. I wanted to scream, to shout, to cry out for help, but I was silenced by the overwhelming dread that held me captive. And then I ran. I ran like I've never run before, the cold night air biting at my skin as I sprinted down the deserted streets. I didn't dare to look back, fearing that the figure would be right behind me, its cold, spectral hand reaching out to snatch me back into its nightmarish world. I never returned to that house. I couldn't. The memory of the figure, its dark silhouette against the blackness, was seared into my mind, a haunting reminder of the horror I had witnessed. I may have left the house, but the shadowy figure, it never left me. It's there, always lurking in the corners of my mind, a chilling echo of that fateful night. The story remains unfinished, the questions unanswered. And perhaps it's better that way. For some things are better left in the shadows, their mysteries unsolved, their stories untold. Ever had one of those nights where everything feels off? This is the story of one such night. I'm just an ordinary woman living in an ordinary small town. There's not much to say about me, really. I'm a creature of habit, one who loves the simple things in life. A steaming cup of coffee in the morning, the sound of birds chirping at dawn, the smell of the earth after it rains. My world is made up of these small, everyday pleasures. But this story isn't about the ordinary days. It's about a night that was anything but ordinary. A night that still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. It started like any other. I came back from work, cooked myself a simple dinner, watched some TV, and then went to bed. But there was a strange feeling in the air that night. An uneasy quiet that was too silent, too still, almost as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As I lay in bed, I heard a noise.
It was faint at first, barely a whisper. It was hard to pinpoint what it was exactly. It sounded like wind rustling through the trees, or maybe the distant hum of a car engine. I brushed it off as nothing, just the usual sounds of the night, distorted by my overactive imagination. But then, it happened again, and this time it was louder, closer. I lay there, wide awake, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence of the night was shattered by these unexplainable sounds, and the worst part? I was alone in my small house in this small town where nothing ever happened. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just the wind, or maybe a stray cat prowling around, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Something felt off. Something was different about this night. And as the clock struck midnight, the real nightmare began. They say midnight is the witching hour, and it couldn't have been more true for me that night. There I was, alone in my house, just me and the silence. But then, the silence started to break. It began with footsteps, soft and distant, like someone tiptoeing around. I'd brush it off, thinking it was just the house settling, like old houses do. Then, shadows began to shift. Out of the corner of my eye, I'd see movements, like a quick darting shadow. I'd turn my head and there would be nothing but the same old furniture, the same old pictures. I told myself, it's just your imagination running wild. It's late, you're tired. But then, things started to get real weird. I'd leave a cup on the table, turn around, and it was gone, only to find it sitting on the kitchen counter where I was certain I didn't leave it. My keys, they moved too. 1 minute hanging by the door, the next on the coffee table. I checked my house, of course, every corner, every room, even the attic and the basement. Nothing was out of place, no one was there. It was just me, alone in the house with the strange occurrences. I tried to shake off the feeling, that feeling of being watched. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the footsteps got. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more solid. And the things, they moved more frequently. It was as if the house was alive, playing a twisted game with me. I called a friend, hoping their voice would calm my nerves, but they didn't pick up. It was just me, alone with the sounds, the shadows, and the moving objects. I sat there in the silence, heart pounding in my chest, the clock ticking away the minutes, but then something happened that sent chills down my spine. I picked up my phone, and what I heard next, I'll never forget. The air was stiff with silence as I held my breath, waiting for the caller to speak. The voice on the other end of the line was unfamiliar and distant, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Get out," was all it said. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, each beat echoing through the silence of the house. The voice was so calm, so matter-of-fact. It was as if the person on the other end of the line was telling me about a change in the weather rather than warning me of imminent danger. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. But the line remained silent. A chill ran down my spine as I repeated the question. "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, it repeated its chilling warning. "Get out!" I felt a wave of panic wash over me. My mind raced with a million questions. Who was this person? Why were they calling me? And what danger were they warning me about? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It was as if the person had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only their cryptic warning. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but the voice never returned. Suddenly, the call ended with a sharp click. I was left alone, my heart pounding in my ears, the echo of the voice still lingering in the air. I stared at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark and lifeless. I tried to call back, but to no avail. The number didn't exist. I was left in a state of confusion and fear, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. The silence of the house seemed to close in around me, the walls whispering, the voices warning. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was horribly wrong. I could feel it in my bones, a sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. And then the power went out. Pitch black darkness, an eerie silence, and a sense of impending doom. That's all there was. No comfort, no security, just me in the dark. It was like being caught in a nightmare, but there was no waking up from this. My heart pounded like a war drum in my chest, echoing through the emptiness of the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains amplified in the silence, was a stark reminder of my solitude. But was I really alone? It felt like eyes were on me, watching from the shadows, tracking my every move. My hands trembled as I moved through the house, the darkness so thick it felt like wading through a pool of ink. I couldn't see where I was going, couldn't see if there was something or someone lurking in the corners. I was blind, vulnerable. My senses heightened, straining for any hint of danger. And then the whispers started. Soft, hushed, like a secret shared in the dead of night. They were indistinct, unintelligible, but they were there. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heart skipped a beat, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Fear clung to me, a cold, unshakable shadow. I'd never felt so alone, so exposed. I was a mouse in a snake's den, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide. But where could I go? This was my home, my sanctuary, now a prison of darkness and fear. My breath hitched, caught in a chokehold of terror. I could feel it, feel the presence. The whispers grew louder, a symphony of voices in an otherwise silent house. I could feel eyes on me, the weight of a gaze that pierced through the darkness. The air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier. An icy chill ran down my spine, my skin prickling with dread. The sense of being watched grew stronger, more intense. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, aware, watching me. And then, I saw it. There in the darkness, a figure stood. It was like a shadow, but darker somehow, a void in the shape of a man. It didn't move, but the very air around it seemed to ripple with a kind of silent intensity. My heart pounded in my chest like a panicked bird, each beat echoing in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I was alone in the middle of the night with this thing in my house. I thought about running, about screaming, but I was frozen in place. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but my curiosity held me there, rooted to the spot. Slowly, I reached for the lamp on the table beside me. My hand was shaking, and I fumbled with the switch. I was desperate for light, for a sense of normalcy, for something to chase away the darkness and the fear that had settled in my heart. The room flooded with light, and for a moment the figure was gone. I blinked, my eyes stinging in the sudden brightness. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it again. It was fainter now, almost transparent, but still there, still watching me. I took a step towards it, heart pounding. It didn't move, didn't react. I reached out a trembling hand, and just as I was about to touch it, it vanished. Like smoke on the wind, it was gone. I stood there for a long time, my hand still outstretched, the echo of its presence lingering in the room. I was alone again, but the fear remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, somewhere, watching me. And as the sun rose, I was left with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. I wasn't alone that night. And I feared this was just the beginning.
It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. There I was, wrapping up another long day at the office. The clock had struck 9:30, and the city lights reflected on the glass windows gave off an eerie glow. The office was deserted, save for the janitor who was making his nightly rounds. His loud, echoing footsteps were a stark reminder of the solitude that lay within these walls after dusk. I gathered my things, shut down my computer, and headed out into the chilly night. The streets were nearly empty, with only the occasional taxi whizzing by. The city, which was usually bustling with life, felt eerily calm, like the calm before a storm. As I approached my apartment building, I noticed something odd. The front door, which was always locked and secured at this hour, was slightly ajar. A shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't sure why, but something felt off. Maybe it was the eerie stillness of the city, or maybe it was the unexpected sight of the open door. It was unsettling, to say the least. I cautiously stepped inside the building, half expecting to find something out of the ordinary, but everything was as it should be. The hallway was quiet, the lights were on, and there were no signs of a break-in. I heaved a sigh of relief, thinking that maybe the janitor had forgotten to close the door properly. When I reached my apartment, however, that sense of unease returned. I noticed my cat, Luna, was acting strange. She was usually excited to see me, but tonight she was cowering under the couch, her eyes wide with fear. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that she must have seen a mouse or heard a loud noise. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. It was like a cold finger tracing down my spine, a prickling sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Little did I know this was just the beginning of an unforgettable night. As I settled down for the night, I heard it. A soft, barely audible knock. It was so faint, I thought I was imagining things. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself back to sleep. But there it was again, a gentle tap, 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 like someone was knocking on my door. It was strange because I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor. Who could be knocking at this hour? I tried to ignore it, wrapping my blanket around me tighter, as if the thin fabric could shield me from the growing sense of unease. But the knocking persisted. It was like a whisper in the wind, there one moment, gone the next, yet always returning, growing louder with each passing second. My heart pounded in my chest, each thump echoing the rhythm of the knocks. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. Who could it be? Why now? My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, the cold screen illuminating the dark room. It was past midnight. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I was scared of a knock? Drawing a deep breath, I decided to face my fear. I slipped out of my bed, my feet touching the cold floor. The apartment was silent, save for the soft knocks that seemed to echo through the hallway. I tiptoed towards the door, my heart pounding louder than the knocks now. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I took another deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. With a swift movement, I turned the doorknob and pulled the door open. I opened the door and there it was, an empty hallway. Or was it? I felt a shiver run down my spine, like I wasn't alone. It was as if the air itself had grown eyes, eyes that followed my every move. The stillness of my apartment, once comforting, now seemed ominous, like a creature lying in wait. Every creak of the floorboards, every brush of wind against the windows, it all seemed to whisper my name. I'd find myself turning around, expecting to see someone there, but I was always met with emptiness. Just me and the silence. It was like being caught in a nightmare, one you're desperately trying to wake up from, but you can't. Maybe it was all in my head, I thought. Maybe the stress of my job, the late nights, the sleepless hours, maybe they were all getting to me. I tried to brush it off, tried to convince myself it was nothing more than fatigue playing tricks on my mind. But then, there were the cold spots. One moment, I'd be walking through the living room, warmth radiating from the heater. The next, I'd step into an invisible pocket of cold. It was like walking into a freezer. And it wasn't just a single spot. They'd move, they'd change, like they had a life of their own. I'd feel a chill, then warmth, then a chill again, all within a few steps. I tried to reason with myself, tried to find logical explanations. Maybe there were drafts I hadn't noticed before, maybe the heater was malfunctioning. But the truth is, no explanation seemed to fit. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle with all the wrong pieces. I began to dread coming home. My sanctuary, my safe space, was now tainted with a sense of unease. I'd sit on the couch, staring at the empty room, the silence pressing in on me, making me feel small, insignificant. It was as if the very walls of my apartment were closing in, like an unseen presence was slowly consuming the space. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The cold spots, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed to something. Something I couldn't see, couldn't touch, but I could feel. It was there, lurking in the shadows, an unseen presence that had made itself very much felt. The next morning I woke up to a sight I'll never forget. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the scene. The living room was a mess, like a whirlwind had swept through it. Furniture was upturned, books were strewn across the floor. My favorite porcelain vase, a cherished gift from my grandmother, lay shattered in pieces. It looked as if someone had been here, but I was alone. My apartment, once my sanctuary, was now a scene of chaos and disarray. Panic welled up within me, a cold dread that made my hands shake. I tried to remember if I had heard anything in the night, any indication of an intruder, but all I can recall is the silence, a silence so profound it was almost deafening. I moved through the apartment, my feet crunching on the debris. My bedroom was untouched, everything exactly as I had left it. But when I got to the kitchen, my heart sank even further. The fridge door was wide open, its contents spilled out on the floor. The cupboards were bare, their contents missing or displaced. I was alone, terrified, and utterly confused. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was it a break-in? But why would someone ransack my apartment and leave me unharmed? Why would they move things around and take nothing of value? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. I felt a chill run down my spine. The sense of violation was overwhelming. It wasn't just the mess or the missing items, it was the feeling of being watched, of an unseen presence that lingered even after the chaos. The thought of being alone in the apartment was unbearable. Desperate and scared, I made a decision. I had to seek help. I couldn't stay here alone, not knowing what happened, not knowing if it would happen again. I had to find out what was happening, but the question was, how? The days went by, but the mystery only deepened. That's what I kept telling myself, as I tried to make sense of the inexplicable events that had become my daily reality. I was desperate for answers, for some sort of understanding, but every attempt I made to unravel the enigma only led me further into the abyss of uncertainty. I scoured the internet for similar occurrences, spoke to psychics, even sought the advice of paranormal investigators, but no one could provide a satisfactory explanation. The unspoken fear that had been slowly creeping into my heart began to take hold. The once familiar and comforting confines of my apartment now felt like a twisted labyrinth, echoing with unseen whispers and shrouded in an ever-present sense of dread. The paranormal activities, once sporadic, started escalating. Objects would move on their own, sometimes violently. The lights would flicker without any electrical issues. I would often wake up in the middle of the night to an icy chill, my breath visible in the darkness. The sense of being watched became so intense that I could almost feel its eyes on me, its unseen gaze piercing through the veil of my sanity. The fear was no longer just a whisper in the back of my mind. It was real, palpable, a living entity that consumed my thoughts and haunted my dreams. I could feel it tightening its grip on me, pulling me further into the depths of its insidious labyrinth. I knew I couldn't stay. Despite the fear, the confusion, the unanswered questions, I had to escape. I packed my belongings and left the apartment, my heart heavy with a strange mix of relief and regret. I was leaving behind a part of my life, a chapter filled with uncertainty and terror. I moved out, leaving behind the mystery unsolved, but sometimes I still wonder, what was it that haunted my apartment? Was it a restless spirit, a malevolent entity, or something far beyond our comprehension? The answers remain hidden, buried deep within the walls of the apartment I once called home. And perhaps it's better that way. After all, some mysteries are better left unsolved. I moved into this house about a year ago. It's an old Victorian, full of history and charm, or so I thought. There was a certain allure to living in a house that had stood the test of time. The high ceilings, the intricate woodwork, the whispers of a bygone era echoing in its very bones. I was smitten at first sight. There was an excitement that bubbled up within me as I unpacked box after box, filling the house with my own history. Every creak of the wooden floor, every rustle of the ancient trees outside, it all felt like the house was welcoming me, settling into our new life together. But then there were the oddities. Doors that I was certain I'd closed were found ajar. Windows that were locked would suddenly swing open, as if pushed by an invisible hand. The house was old, and old houses had their quirks, I told myself. The wind, maybe, or the house settling, nothing to worry about. Yet there were other things, too. The way the lights would flicker without reason, the way the temperature would drop suddenly in certain rooms, the way I'd find objects, like my keys or my phone, in places I was certain I hadn't left them. And then there were the footsteps. Soft, barely there, but unmistakable. As if someone was wandering the house when I knew I was alone. I shrugged it off, chalked it up to the idiosyncrasies of an old house. I joked about it with friends, laughed about my haunted Victorian. I could handle the odd quirks. I wasn't easily spooked, I'd say, rolling my eyes and sipping my wine. But then the nightmares started. Nightmares so vivid, so terrifying, they made my blood run cold. Dreams of shadowy figures and whispers in the dark, of being watched, of being followed. and always the feeling of pure, unadulterated fear. I could handle the odd quirks. It was the nightmares that started to worry me. Every night, I'd dream of a woman. She was always crying, always in pain. This wasn't your typical nightmare where you wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. No, this was far more insidious. This was a dream that would linger like a shroud long after I had awoken. The woman was a constant, a shadowy figure always just out of clear sight. I could never see her face, but her sobs, they were crystal clear, a sorrowful sound that echoed in every corner of my dreams, reaching out from the darkness to touch me in ways I could never fully shake off. Her pleas for help were a haunting soundtrack to my sleep, a chilling lullaby that filled my nights with dread. Each dream was the same, a cycle of fear and despair. The woman was always there, her cries of pain and desperate pleas for help punctuating the silence of the night. It was as if she were trapped, calling out to me from someplace dark and distant. I could never reach her, no matter how hard I tried. The dreams left me feeling helpless, a prisoner in my own sleep. I would wake up in the morning, drained and exhausted, the echo of the woman's cries still ringing in my ears. The dreams started to take a toll on me. My days were filled with fatigue, my nights with fear. I became a walking ghost, a shell of my former self. I was constantly on edge, jumpy at the slightest noise. I started to dread going to sleep, the thought of the woman and her cries filling me with a sense of impending doom. Sleep, once a haven of rest and relaxation, had become my own personal hell. My bed, a battleground where I fought against the darkness every night. But the real horror was yet to come. One day I found a hidden door behind a bookshelf. It led to a small room. The room was as quiet as a mausoleum, the air stagnant, as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The walls were bare, save for a thick layer of dust that had settled over the years. The only piece of furniture in the room was a large mirror, standing tall and ominous against the far wall. The mirror was old, its wooden frame chipped and worn. The glass was smudged, but not enough to hide my reflection. As I stared into it, a chill ran down my spine. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the mirror was a portal to a world that wasn't meant for the living. My heart pounded in my chest. My breath hitched in my throat, but I couldn't look away. The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavier, as if I were being watched. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just an old mirror in an old room, but something about the room felt wrong. It felt alive. The walls seemed to whisper secrets in a language I couldn't understand. The mirror seemed to stare back at me, its silent gaze unsettling. I felt a presence, a dark energy that seemed to emanate from the mirror, filling the room with an oppressive dread. I wanted to run, to escape the room and the suffocating fear that wrapped around me like a shroud. But I felt a pull, a compulsion that anchored me to the spot. It was like the room, the mirror, was calling to me, drawing me in. I felt a strange connection, a bond that I couldn't explain. The more I tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls whispering louder, the mirror's gaze more intense. I felt trapped, ensnared in the room's eerie allure. The fear was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a morbid curiosity that gnawed at my sanity. I wanted to leave, but something was compelling me to stay. The room and its mirror held a secret, a story that was begging to be told. And despite the dread that consumed me, I felt a need to uncover the truth, to unravel the mystery of the hidden room. In the mirror, I saw her, the woman from my dreams. She was there, right before my eyes, as real as the reflection I'd been expecting to see. She was a ghostly figure, ethereal, yet terrifyingly tangible. Her eyes, like two emerald pools of sadness, glistened with the weight of 1,000 unshed tears. Her lips moved in a desperate plea, a silent scream begging for help. Her face was a paradox of beauty and torment, as if she was trapped, caught in a world between mine and another, a world reflected in the mirror. Her hands were pressed against the glass, as if trying to break free from the confines of her mirrored prison. I could see her anguish, her desperation. It was a sight that left me frozen, my heart pounding in my chest like a wild drum. I wanted to look away, to escape from this haunting vision, but something about her held me captive. Her sorrow, her fear, it echoed my own, reverberating within me like a chilling tune. I was drawn to her, to the woman in the mirror. Her pain was a siren call I couldn't resist. The mirror, once just a piece of decor, was now a window into another reality. A reality where this woman was trapped, pleading for my help. There was a sense of urgency in her eyes, a plea for rescue. I knew I had to do something. I had to help her. Slowly, I reached out. My hand trembling, my breath hitched, my heart pounded even louder. The cold surface of the mirror sent a shiver down my spine. It was just a mirror, just a piece of glass. But it felt like a barrier, a thin veil separating me from her. I pressed my hand against the mirror, matching hers on the other side. For a moment, I could almost feel her, could almost touch her. It was as if our realities were merging, as if I was about to step into her world. I reached out to touch the mirror, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was on the floor of the hidden room. The mirror was gone. My heart thudded in my chest as I tried to piece together the fragments of my memory. The last thing I remembered was reaching out towards the mirror, then a blinding pain, and everything went black. Now the mirror, the woman, everything was gone. It was just me in the room, alone and terrified. With a shiver, I crawled out of the room and into the safety of the familiar. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. I knew that something was terribly wrong. I could feel it in the marrow of my bones. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was real, and I needed answers. And so, I dove into the history of the house. It was a grueling task, sifting through old newspapers, records, and documents. But after days of relentless digging, I found it. 100 years ago, a woman was brutally murdered in this very house. Her name was Amelia, and she was as beautiful as she was tragic. The story was a chilling one. Amelia was a young, vibrant woman full of life and love. But one fateful night, her life was brutally snuffed out. The details were gruesome, the kind of stuff that sends chills down your spine. The murderer was never found, and Amelia's spirit was said to be trapped within the house. Suddenly everything fell into place. The nightmares, the hidden room, the woman in the mirror ... It was all Amelia. She was the woman trapped in the mirror, reaching out to me, begging for help. A chill ran down my spine as the realization hit me. The woman in the mirror was real. She was a ghost, a spirit trapped in this house, my house, and I was the only one who could help her. I realized then that I wasn't dreaming. The woman was real and she was trapped in my house.